Hi, this is Zena Me, and today we're going to be talking to Tad Hargrave, who, for many of people who know from my elders community, I've mentioned him a few times. So this is brilliant. It's just a great opportunity for you to actually um, kind of meet him and also meet him in our eldership space as well. So I'm welcome, Tad. It's great to have you with us today.
Good to be here.
So I will say a little bit about how I came across Tad, because I think that's an interesting story in itself. And I was looking for a different approach to marketing. And not many people know this, but when I was about 25, I part qualified in marketing. And didn't pursue it because I just felt that it really was. I didn't seem to be attuned to what the whole concept was about. So I'm talking about in the mid 90s here, and this was before I had my own business. Um, but I was interested in how we connect people to what we're doing and what we're offering. And so that's one of the reasons I chose to look at marketing. However, I have had many horrible stories of working with marketing people over the nearly 30 years of working in business. And each time I go to them and say, okay, let's talk about marketing. How do we market? How do I market what I'm doing? They would turn around and say, this is who you should present yourself to be. And that was always my biggest challenge because it was like, but that's not me. That's not what I'm about. And also being kind of put into some kind of box was something that I felt very uncomfortable about. It didn't seem to kind of reflect what the work that I was doing or who I was. Um, or even the clients that I worked with and the nature of the way that I worked with the clients. Um, so little things like, oh, if you're in the corporate world, it has to be blue, or this is the way you have to speak to corporate people, or and so on. And so I've gone through many different marketing agencies over the years and spent thousands of pounds on that as well. Um, However, in about 2017, having left the business school in the UK as a tutor, I was looking for something different, and I followed my instinct to a website that always captured my imagination by a lady called Andrea Palfreman. And so the website she designed was for Toko Pa, and the who wrote the book Belonging. And her website was so beautiful and seemed to just capture who she was that I found Andrea, who designed her website, and she was based in Canada. And myself and Andrea had a wonderful relationship working on my first website of its kind. And it was Andrea who said to me, hey, you need to know about Tad Hargrave. He's going to be your vibe, right up your street and what you're looking for. Because at that time as well, I was starting to emerge much more into um, social transformation and looking at the wider systems that operated. So that's how I came across you, Ted. And then I came on your mentorship program in 2020 during the pandemic, and we we went through that ride together. And I think I was the last cohort of your mentorship program, wasn't I? We met some amazing people. So yes, and now I would consider you a really good friend as well. So I'm going to hand over to you, Tad, to say a little bit about kind of your philosophy on marketing, because a lot of people don't know you in depth, like I do. So, I'll let you introduce yourself and say a little bit about your background and how you came into this view and philosophy of marketing and business.
Thanks. Well, yeah, gosh, like you, I learned a lot of sales and marketing from sources. It's always a mixed bag. There's some of it that's good, and then there's some of it that's sketchy. And the thing that's interesting about it to me is none of them say they're sketchy. None of them say they're manipulative. In fact, almost all of them say, here's how to market yourself without doing something sketchy, without being unethical, without being pushy. But then they do pushy things. Then they teach you how to lie, how to, use people and manipulate and coerce. And so that's worth attending to. That rhetoric doesn't matter as much as behavior. If you want to market Well, If if you've got a business, you want to market it. So if you're trying to pick who to teach you, look at how they market. And does that feel good to you? Because that's what they're going to teach you. It's the only thing they can teach you is what they know. So yeah, I learned from a lot of these sources, and I just thought, well, I guess that's what you have to do. This is what works. I mean, I was 18 at the time, and I just had no idea. I didn't know any better. But it's a terrible feeling to be doing something that you can see is landing poorly with people. And there's a kind of gaslighting in the industry, though, where there's all the rationalizations that come in of, they'll thank you later for pushing them. And if you don't sell them, you're hurting them because you believe in what you have, don't you? And you've got to sell yourself first, which is a strange psychological conundrum that immediately shatters you in half with a part of you that somehow was sold on the thing. We don't know how it got sold on the thing, but that's where it landed. And the part of you that isn't sold and in some kind of fucked up internal gestalt toxic family system, it berates this part of you. Anyways, so there's all these rationalizations for selfishness fundamentally, and which you need. It's the called the Novocaine for the soul. You have to drink that Kool-Aid, otherwise it just feels terrible to be doing this. But this is the terror that I think so many people have is on one side, I can just not do any marketing because I can't find a way that feels ethical, so I won't do any marketing at all. I can't pay the rent, but I get to feel vaguely morally superior to people, and that's not bad. So I can do that, or I can market in a way that seems to be effective. They tell me is effective, but it's unethical, and now I can't sleep at night. And so people feel like those are the only choices, and that's not. There is at least a third alternative, uh, which is that you can market in a way that is both. And I would add a third thing that what I've come to my sense of marketing is there's three pillars or three things that need to be braided together in marketing. And I don't know if any one of them is most important, though I have a sense of which one the other two serve. But one of them is ethics. And it just has to be aligned with our conscience. It has to be consent based, trauma informed. It has to proceed with an enormous regard and respect for other people. In ethics, this etymology comes from ethos, which kind of speaks to the spirit of the people. So it has to proceed in such a way that the spirit of the people is not damaged. Another way to say this is the goodwill between people, that it doesn't compromise the relationships between people.
Mm.
Second is it has to be effective, it has to work. And that really isn't the enemy of ethics. It speaks to a level of craftsmanship. If you buy a couch, a handmade couch from somebody, you want it to work. You don't want it to break. You get a handmade wood spoon at some farmer's market, and then there's a hole in it, or it breaks in, there's craft is not the enemy of goodness. Effectiveness is not the enemy of goodness. It's actually a very high bar of expression of humanity. It's one of the capacities that we have is to make things and to make things in a way that they do the job they're intended to do, that brings us a little bit of ease in our life. And the third is beauty. And beauty meaning it has to feed the soul of the world. It has to feed the soul of the beauty. Martine Prechtel speaks about it as beauty is the thing that makes us want to jump up and live again. It's what makes us want to keep continuing. It's what makes life worthwhile. All of us have had times in our life which were very bleak and barren, and there was no beauty anywhere. And then something beautiful comes along, and that could be a person, it could be an animal, it could be a part of nature, it could be a piece of art, but something that suddenly you felt alive again. It's something stirred in you. And marketing, when it's done well, can do that. And so those three need to be braided together. But my sense is the ethics and effectiveness work to serve and highlight beauty. That's why we're in this world. That's why we're alive, is to make beauty, to feed the holy in the world that's keeps us alive and has been feeding us all along. So that's what I've come to. I mean, I think that's the simplest I can put it, and that it's really you don't have to choose, but people often do, and they lean on one or the other. They say, okay, I'm just going to be ethical, but they're not effective and it's not beautiful. Okay, and you're people like you, they see how well intentioned you are. They know that you're a good person, but nobody buys from you. Nobody's inspired by your work in particular. And if you just lean on effectiveness, but there's no beauty and no ethics, I mean, this is just the straight shyster. Um, Nobody trusts you. And you could just lean on beauty and you're the artist and look at you. Oh, so good. But nobody buys and it doesn't necessarily work. They like your aesthetic, but nobody's gonna like, well, it makes beautiful spoons. I mean, they look good, but they got holes in them and they break and they so so there does need to be all three, yeah, in my experience. I'll stop there. I could keep going.
No, that's amazing. So I know kind of over the years we've talked about um eldership. We have a shared joint um love of the whole concept of eldership in communities. And I know you've done a lot of work on eldership yourself, Tad. So one of the things that I think we, in when we start looking at eldership, is we often kind of come up against very quickly is this concept of ethics, and even the concept of, can I be an elder and in business? Can I be an elder and market? So how do all those things kind of fit together? Um, because this kind of, I suppose, when we think about what we know about eldership, and in the West we don't know a lot, I would say, because it is a function of community that we've lost. And that, and obviously part of what I'm trying to do is kind of bring it back in and kind of bring it into people's awareness of that there is a passage of eldership, there is a stage of life of eldership. But often those people are not at the stage where they've retired, or they've they've got enough money to look after themselves, sort of thing. So then we come up against this difficulty of how do we bring together this idea of eldership business. The other thing I just wanted to say is I've been starting to explore what we mean by business, because immediately when people talk business, people think that that's about profit. It's about money. When actually, if you look into the etymology of the word, it's actually about livelihood. So, and it doesn't even mention money or profit. So we seem to have kind of distorted this word of business even. So yeah, I'm just thinking what your thinking is on that.
Yeah. So there's a few thoughts. One, um, I'm cagey about speaking about elderhood or as a being an elder.
Mm.
I mean, the teachings I've received on this from Stephen Jenkinson are that elderhood's a function, but it's not an identity. It's something that we do. It's not something that we are. So that's number one, is that this hankering after uh, this identity, I think, becomes part of the problem
Mm.
itself, and short circuits the whole thing, especially when we're wanting to be seen as an elder. When that becomes the algebra, is how do I get recognized and certified, and people treat me like an elder? I think that whole stance is not very um, elderish. Uh, the easiest way to tell that somebody's not a medicine man is that they immediately tell you that they're a medicine man, or that they ever tell you that this is one of these things. It's a name like most names in traditional cultures that we're on the receiving end of, or we're not. As Martin Shaw once said, he said, you might want your name to be Sweetgrass Woman, but if you're always late to pick up your kids from school, that's your name. So, so there's that. The second is, I don't know how well served we are, though I know it's just, we're riffing on this a bit, to talk about elderhood as an idea or a concept that's dislocated in an archetypal fashion, that there's some essentialized elderhood that we get to, but that there are a lot of ways of practicing this. There's a lot of ways of engaging in the act of eldering. And there's not just one. There's not a sort of archetypal prototype of this is what it looks like. Everyone's going to have their own way to do it. And that doesn't mean it's a free for all. That doesn't mean anything goes, but it means there's a lot more going than I think we think.
Mm.
The way that you might elder somebody is very different than the way that I would elder them, and a third person would bring in something else. And in a traditional culture, so many around the world, I think this would be recognizable to most of our ancestors and people who are in more intact indigenous cultures today, is that you live in this web of kinship. And so everyone a certain age is your auntie and your uncle. Everyone a certain age is grandmother, grandfather. This biological denotation of grandmother, grandfather isn't doesn't hold the same freight as it does for us. We only get four grandparents. In a traditional culture, you'd have dozens, which would mean as a young person, each one of them would have their own gifts and their own capacities, and you might know who to go to, and you could receive a different sort of eldering from all of them. Because some of them have different knowledge, some of them have and different teachings, some of them are better at sympathy and empathy, and some of them are better for the tough love that you might be feeling like you need. You know, some of them know more songs or dances and better with crafts. And all of those can be a way. And as you say, business is it's about livelihood. It's the word marketing has its roots in exchange. That there's this back and forth, there's this web of reciprocity. Yes, the global cartel capitalist system that we live in right now is toxic. It's profoundly, deeply messed up. Interest charged on money, the Federal Reserve. I mean, we could go down the rabbit holes of the whole banking system, the IMF, the World Bank, the WEF, all of it. It's so profoundly corrupt. And this is what we live in. We don't live in a gift economy, most of us listening to this. We live in so it's good to make a distinction between Main Street and Wall Street. Wall Street is in trouble. and causing trouble. But that's different than Main Street. You got the high street, the moms and the mom and pop shops. You got the farmers markets. You got the craft shows. I mean, in London, the Borough Market, and all over the UK, you got these beautiful markets where people are making their livelihood. So I think it's important that we're a little more precise in our language, because to lump all of those into capitalism and to say that anyone exchanging money for anything is sort of equal, that the big pharma executives who charge insane amounts for products that decades later are proven to kill people and not even help with the thing based on a profound misdiagnosis of the trouble. To say that's the same as somebody who's knitting scarves and selling them. So I just think we got to do that. And the other thing is, and I do have your original question in mind, but I know it's true. The West is in trouble, but it's also there's a lot of self-loathing amongst white people these days, and I think it's good to point out. I think elderhood is also in trouble in the East, and it's in trouble in the South. It's in trouble in the North. It's in trouble in the world, in modernity. This modern civilized empire has gotten its fingers everywhere at this point. So yes, it's true. It's in trouble in the West, but it's not to dislocate that from the rest of the world and imagine that all the trouble is here. And if we just went to China, everything would be fine. There's some other place, and now there are cultures still more intact where elderhood is still more revered. But I would say that's less about probably these days. My guess is that's less about east, west, north, south, and that's more about in the cities or outside of the cities. It's much more about how passionately people are clinging to their traditions or not, which I think is almost impossible to do in cities. So, so there's all of that. But so can one practice elderhood in business? I don't see why not. I don't see any reason why not. To imagine there's some place where it can't, I don't know, maybe there is, but it not only can it needs to be. There need to be people who are uh, playing this function of of speaking up for limits and the fragility of life, speaking up for nature, for the holy, for this web of kinship that we've lost, that there is such a thing as wisdom. These things are desperately needed in business from what I can see. I mean, you and I have both been on the receiving end of the lack of it,
Mm.
of uninitiated adults running around acting as if and preening and posturing as if they've got wisdom when they've got tactics. And then it's just this chain reaction of reactivity and hurt that keeps getting passed on. And at some point, somebody has to say no. And by the power invested in me by nobody, I will say what I think is right and what I think is wrong. I mean, people can agree or disagree, but I'm not going to pretend I don't have an opinion about what's ethical and what's not ethical. So, if ethos, the spirit of the people, that seems to be what the elders are tending to, is this goodwill and the spirit and the relationships between the people and the world. So, yeah. And I look forward to seeing what people do in business to bring this in. And part of that elderhood may be then certain businesses must not continue. Certain
Mm.
kinds of business have to end. That it's not an uncommon thing, I think, for traditional cultures where your culture gets to a certain size and you realize you've got to split up. There's too many of you for the land base. And it's not going to be the kids that say, let's split up. It's not going to be the teenagers. The adults might be starting to get a clue, but it's probably going to be the older ones who've seen enough years and enough patterns to realize we're hurting the land that we love. And so some of us have to go.
Mm.
We're going to have to divide up. And similarly in business, things may get too big, things may become harmful, and then
Mhm.
one has to stop it. Anyways, that's me just freestyling on it.
And I suppose as well, one of the things that we're looking at in our eldership community is identifying your niche. So and if you're wanting to embrace eldering, what might that look like for you? What sort of things might you want to be doing more of, doing less of, maybe stop doing, as well. So, but I also noticed that people are still finding that really difficult to, if you like, individuate themselves and be really honest about who and what they really are. So there's this kind of, oh no, I don't want to tell people this about me or show this part of me. Now my big thing is, you need to be authentic. That's the whole niche in peace, because yes, you might not appeal to everyone. And I think a lot of people are concerned that, for instance, if I'm working with big corporates or with these institutions and systems, they'll reject me if I am more honest about who I am and what I'm about. Now, my understanding is that that's not a bad thing. Actually, because you're, if you like, by you finding your niche and being authentic, then you're more likely to attract the right kind of people to what your essence is, what your vibe is, what you have to offer, um, and contribute to the whole. But there's I notice there's a real fear for a lot of people in being really clear about that, and communicating that and being honest about it.
Yeah, well, it sounds like they get it, in terms of the fear of speaking up, because let's imagine this maybe, that there's this circle of power, and in the center, that's where the seat of power is. This is where all the money is. This is where all the control of resources is. Uh, and this is the worldview that looks at the world as full of resources instead of full of relatives. This is the elite, in other words. Then you go way to the margins and you get those who have been marginalized. All the people who've been pushed off their land, had genocide committed against them, all the people who've gone through these kind of dislocations and impositions of empire. The fundamental function of this economic structure we have, and I would throw communism into this with capitalism, is that the resources flow from the margins to the center. That's the structure. If you facilitate the flow of resources from the margins to the center, you will get rewarded. If you thwart it, you will be punished. If you successfully stop it, they'll probably kill you. That's the game that's being played right now. And if violence comes from the center and goes out, it is invisible. If violence gets sent from the margins inwards, that is, you know, sacrilege.
Everything.
If a cop kills somebody, often invisible. Somebody kills a cop, boy, this is on the news 24/7. And so you can tell who's in the center by what happens when the violence starts to go. And who does the media, which is owned by these same forces, who do they support and stand behind? So, what's the function of eldering in a structure like that? This becomes the question. If you know you're in that sort of a structure and you know that this structure, it starts off small and then it expands and expands and expands and takes more and more land and resources and eventually it gets to a point there's just no more to go. So now starts to collapse back inwards and just takes the rest, takes the scraps, collecting everything towards the center. So if you know you're there, you're in that system, a structure, what does it ask of you? And that's a big if, because I don't imagine that me having just said that had everyone listening give an amen and say, thank you, Tad, for confirming what I've always believed. It's so great that somebody else is saying it. I imagine most people would not be terribly comfortable with that or the implications of it. Because, yeah,
Or even their part in it, or even their part in, because we've all contributed something to this.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So, the contrast to that is a kind of web of kinship, is a web of relationships where there's no center at all. There's just this entanglement of connections between people and animals and the rest of the world. So I don't have the answer to that, but I'll just say this to me seems to be the question for these times. If you are born in a troubled time, then the specific trouble of the time that you're born into and the place that you're born into is going to dictate to a certain extent what's asked of you. And we could imagine that that is combined with something else. Let's just imagine that's a big circle, is just the troubles of the time, and that trouble has a certain signature that's different in China than it is in Canada. It's different in the States and different in different regions in all those places. Within that circle, you could imagine three little circles in a Venn diagram. And one is this question of what are your wounds? What are the things you've personally experienced that you have overcome? Maybe you were abused as a child or neglected. Maybe you went through some real heartbreak. Maybe you had a child die, or whatever it is. We've all gone through our troubles personally. That gives a good sense of the direction of one's niche, of one's role. And so we could also say that there's such a thing, first of all, as a role, and then that role may continue but look different as we get older, or it may deepen. It may not look the same as when we were young, even though it's the same fundamental thing. My definition of niche is, comes from the French verb nicher, which means to make a nest. So that the niche is just, it's the nest you're making. It's where you belong. It's the role or function you're known for in the community. And it may look different, but have the same constituent parts. But so number one is our wounds, the metabolizing of those wounds into something beautiful that we can offer gives a direction. Then there's our gifts. We're all just born with certain things we're good at. I've always felt very at home at the front of a room. I mean, since I was 12, it would just put me in front of a group of people. I loved it. Other people, that's just the worst thing in the world for them. So there are certain gifts we have. Some people are very good at kind of administration or details, or people are good making things with their hands, or people are good at writing. Some people are good at etc. And you know what the gifts are because you're always puzzled that other people struggle with it. They say, "How do you do that?" It's like, "But what are you talking about? You host a party so well. I don't know how you do it." And for you, it's just like that you invite people over, you ask people how they're, what are you talking about? It's confusing to you. And then the third is your nature, that you have a certain vibe, as you were saying earlier. Some people very shy, some people very big, and parents know this. You have these kids and they just come out with a personality that is distinct. I mean, identical twins and then two different personalities. There's something of the soul in people come in with something. And if you're engaged in a kind of work that goes against your nature. I mean, if you're profoundly introverted, for example, and then you take a job that asks you to do extroverted things, you're going to suffer. So it strikes me that it's again this braiding of those three things and more, but those are three that come to mind that give us our niche. But it's all housed within the times that we're in. I mean, both the beauty, the wealth of our times, but also the poverties of our times. This is where the marching orders come from. And uh, the unwillingness to choose any of these things, it just strikes me as a recipe for suffering, because then you're probably going to do some work that isn't actually aligned with any of those things, a work that you're not necessarily good at, not competent in. You're going to feel like you're failing a lot. And there's always going to be this sense like I'm here for something and this isn't it. So it's worth doing the deep dive because people resist niching. I found that pretty universally. People resist it because it feels like you're being asked to cut off an arm or a leg. But so they're scared of the niching, but nobody's scared of their niche once it lands. When people find that thing, there's an immediate relief. Like, oh, that could be it. You know, it's somehow it had never occurred to them, and often it's right in front of their face. I mean, I think was Larissa Noonan in your cohort? Yeah.
Yes.
So, you know, she was an example of she does this ancestral healing work, but it's a modality and it helps lots of people. And she knew that there'd be more and more people doing it every year and knew she had to figure out what she was about within it. And in some of the Google Docs that we were working on, she made a offhand comment about she knows that a lot of her people came from religious fundamentalist homes, and that had been her background too. And I just said, well, what if 80% of your clients were that moving forward? She said that'd be great. And so we just focused on that. And then her husband, and then she'd been struggling with this for a long time, trying to figure out her niche. And then her husband said, I could have told you that. So she murdered him. Not
I,
single.
I think what one of the things that I say within the eldership niche is that that wounding is also the ancestral wounding patterns as well. So, and also the wounding from the land as well that we were born on or lived on. So so all that's weaved in as well when we're thinking
Yeah.
about
If
elder.
you can see the connection between your wound and the larger wound of the
Yeah.
society you live in, there's a real heft, there's a real potency to the work. Um, yeah, you know, so all of this to be said, that you're here, you are, and you're talking to some corporate person. And how many dangerous ideas are you going to share with them? How many things are you going to say that you think they may not be open to? And I don't know. I really don't have the answer. Sometimes there's good reasons not to say things. There are times to be stum about things, and there's times to say it. But that's part of the wrangling. I think you know, I can't take that away from people. That's part of the wrangling that I think grows the capacity for elderhood is this discernment of when do I say something, when don't I? And maybe it's better to not say something now, but we'll weave it in later and come back to it and when there's more of a relationship. But certainly, if one is going to operate in this circle of power and just try to keep moving closer to the center and never speak up and never say anything, what good are you? How are you of any use to any of us? You
Mm.
seem to be good for yourself, but what about the world? So I don't know honestly what that looks like, but also if it's coming from an emotional fear of they won't like me and they're going to reject me, then that there's some growing up to do.
Mm.
I mean, that's not a real elder move, is to be like, oh, my feelings are hurt because they didn't like me, and I'm going to let that dictate everything in my life. If you're run by that, that's the road to elderhood for you, I would say, or one of them is contending with the part of you that can't be authentic and is stuck in people pleasing. And I would make a distinction between that kind of emotional reaction and reflex rather than there may be a discernment of, okay, I'm not going to drop a whole decolonizing conversation on this person right now. But you might be able to plant seeds, and that's probably part of the move. And there will be some openness to some, but there is an art of, I think we've all found you get to a certain age, you realize, oh, if I push too hard, people entrench.
Mm.
And now it's worse than before. And that there is an art to engaging with people in a way that they actually do open up to other possibilities and other ideas. And everyone's going to have their own way of that. And it's not for me to tell anyone how to do it, other than the world's in trouble. There are people suffering. And, Martine Prechtel has a line I love so much. He says, being beautiful on the way to the answer is the answer. So
Mm.
then, okay, there's this person. You might be able to help them. How do you engage with them in a way that keeps the beauty alive and that doesn't kill it? Um, so that there's more beauty in the world at the end of your interaction than there was when you started. And again, I think everyone will have to translate that differently for their own circumstance.
Mm. And I think again, this is one of the things that I've realized with eldership is really going much deeper into your own creative process. So I think a lot of people have not tapped that, have not really understood their own deep creative processes. So, sometimes, like, just to kind of connect to what you were saying about beauty as well, is like, bringing a piece of music in, or bringing a poem in, or a quote, or whatever. It often that goes deeper as a seed than being explicitly direct about something sometimes. So it's just like those different ways of using your own creative talents and processes to communicate and to express that beauty and that those ethics that you so beautifully talked about at the beginning.
Well, it makes me think my friend Javin Bernakovich, she does a lot of coaching around permaculture, but also life coaching and how do we make sustainable lives and land, and he weaves them together beautifully. But when he would do these 2-week permaculture design certifications, he would, at the end of it, people have learned so much and they're often overwhelmed. A kind of, God, that was so much. Where do I start? And this was his exercise to get them to start. He'd ask everybody, what was your favorite part of the training? What was the part that really lit you up? And people had one. There's usually something that's like, oh my God, this was amazing. He said, great. So there's that. Number two, what's a trouble or an issue in your community that may or may not relate directly to that, but what's the thing? And number three, what's something you're good at outside of permaculture? Maybe it's graffiti, maybe it's, whatever it is. And then he would encourage people to think about how do you weave those together? How do you weave together the trouble in your community, the thing you're so interested in, and what you're good at? And the instructions he gave, which I thought was brilliant, he called it the 10 by 10 by 100 challenge. He said, spending no more than $100 and no more than 10 hours, do something in 10 days. 10 hours, 10 days, no more than $100. Just try something small. Yeah, and I'm a big fan of, and here's the thing too. Let's say, yeah, you have a love of poetry or a love of songs or a love of old stories or a love of making art or love of handcrafts. You've got some passion. If you weave that into your work, you're instantly more unique. And just from a sheer marketing standpoint, this is more compelling. You're more likely to attract people who are going to be a good fit for you. You're no longer a generic consultant or coach or whatever, because you have something particular you do. If you like foraging for mushrooms in the woods, you could take people out and do that with them while you talk about their life. You like gardening, could you invite people over and you work on the garden together and then have tea, and there's all sorts of creative, interesting ways that you can do the work that you want to do. It doesn't have to look like everybody else. I mean, if it does, one, how unsatisfying for you, but two, how useless in marketing. because now you just look like everybody else.
Mm, mm. I know, but again, for a lot of people, I know there's a lot of safety in looking like everybody else as well. So that
But
horrible.
is there? Is there? I mean, I'd push back on that whole notion. If I look like everybody else, I'm safer. If I fit in, I'm safer. I mean, as the game Tetris told us, when you fit in, you disappear. That's the function. When you fit in, you vanish. Also, number two, to be Krishnamurti's line, to be well adjusted to a profoundly, it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. If you fit in to a deeply sick system, I mean, is that safe to be a part of a sick system that's slowly killing itself? Is that a safe move? Do you imagine that because you're throwing other people on the bus now, they're not going to come for you? That's really safe. I think there was the that Heath Ledger, the Batman movie where the Joker, they rob a bank and there's like 14 of them, but then the 14th one doesn't realize he gets killed. And so then the 13 get away, but that 14th, he gets killed. But then the 13th didn't realize that he was going to get killed too by the other 12, until it's only the Joker getting away. That's the system. So is that really safe? You're going to roll with that kind of person and imagine that he's telling you the truth and you're going to be safe. And to fit in, I mean, I'll just tell you from a marketing standpoint, when I look at people who fit in because they think, oh, I'm not going to rock the boat, I won't be safe, it means their marketing is there's no heft, there's no spark to it. They really just blend in and nobody sees them. And this is something I've done, and I would encourage people to try this as an exercise. I just did this a couple Fridays ago on a call. I had everyone get a blank piece of paper and I said, I want you to write out at the top, you're going to write the words, I believe. And underneath it, you're going to go on a bit of a rant of everything you can think that you believe about your work, about your industry, about the world, about your product, about the problems people have, the solutions to it, all that stuff. Just going to go on a rant. What do you see missing in your industry and the work? And I said, I invite you to start with the scary thing. The thing that you would for sure get canceled if you said your colleagues would lose their minds. Start with, it's got to be true, but start with that. And I just gave them 5 minutes and I put them in Zoom rooms to share with each other. And then they came back and I said, how was that? And for so many people, it's like, that was liberating. That was exhilarating. It was so exciting. And one person said, I've never said that out loud before.
Mm,
Now, what I would submit is that thing, the thing that you are most terrified to share. If you share it, three things will happen. One, you'll be terrified, but also exhilarated. It's a high emotion kind of thing, but there is a liberating feeling to just saying the thing. Number two, people are going to be upset. But number three, it won't be as bad as you think because there's also going to be a very positive response. That piece that you post, that rant that you go on, will get you more positive response than anything you've posted before. I've seen this again and again when somebody finally just snaps, and it's the emperor's new clothes. Yeah. When the kid finally says he's naked, got no clothes on. Everybody, oh yeah, that's when everybody responds. The person who's willing to tell the truth when nobody else um, is admired and respected, reviled by certain people too, who benefit from the current arrangement of the system, but or the people who identify with that system. You criticize the church, people who identify with the church, they're just not going to be happy with you. But you also get free and you get noticed. The pieces that I've posted that have gotten the most response were often the ones where I had the most bottled up grievance, and I finally just and I put it out. Because if you're feeling this, I promise you're not the only one. I promise you there's other people who are seeing the same things, but either don't want to admit it because it so goes against the societal programming, or two, they see it clearly, but they're so scared to say it because
mm,
what would the consequences to them be? And to imagine that somebody is going to say, I really want to play this function of elder, but I don't want to speak to the truth that I see. I'll let the younger people do that. That's not anyone I would go to for eldering.
Mhm.
I mean, that's somebody I would avoid. That is, there is a certain amount of courage it takes to be authentic and to tell the truth from what you see, from where you're standing.
Mm. Wow. I mean, the only thing I would kind of just want to say to that is one of the things that I found in your work when we worked together, which opened things up for me, because I've done some stuff on niche before. Obviously, nearly 30 years in business, it's like you've done stuff on, or you've explored the whole niching thing, even though we may not, and I didn't, hadn't really got to what that was. But the key for me that opened the door was the point of view and the philosophy. So actually that I found that much easier, which is in essence is what we're talking about now. It's being able, so suddenly I felt been given permission and a kind of a place as part of what I do to say, hey, this is who I am and this is what I believe in and this is the way I see the world. And that I'd never seen that in marketing before. Done so explicitly, because of course a lot of it is like, saying the same thing as everybody else, so, saying the same sort of stuff really. And so, or even like quoting from the same books or whatever that might be. And for me, the freedom to be able to kind of go, hey, this is my point of view, and I'm going to put that out there and speak about it, transformed what I was doing.
Well, and if I can put something out, thank you for that. Because yeah, that's also been uh, true for me, and I've seen it for so many people that the point of view. If our niche is what we're known for, it's our reputation. Point of view is a often one of the most important parts of that in terms of what we're known for. But so if we can imagine, so we've talked about ethics, we talked about niche, we talked about point of view, and I have this pyramid that I've done for a while that I called the five fundamentals, which I've added to a bit. But I realized there's something even more important than ethics. There's something more fundamental than ethics, and it's having space. It's having enough room in your life and space. And I think this is probably one of the big moves towards practicing elderhood is a lot of stuff has to go. You've got to cut out a lot of stuff. There's a lot of the half-hearted things in life that just aren't going to cut it anymore. I think part of stepping into those older years is a real discernment of what actually matters and what doesn't matter. What do I care about? What don't I care about? But you can't do that unless you make room for it. And so many of us have made our lives, I mean, myself, I'm the first amongst sinners on this one, but we've made our lives so full, so busy that there's no room for wisdom to appear. Wisdom requires a certain amount of time for reflection, a certain amount of time for stepping back and seeing a bigger picture. You can't do this in the rat race. There's a certain amount of you have to people have asked me, Tad, how are you so prolific? And the most honest answer I can give is other things suffered.
Mm.
I couldn't do everything. I had to say no to certain things. So again, that's not something I can tell people what it is, but it does become a question of, there was the story of a college professor who asked his students, he said, what's most important to you in life? And they give lots of answers. I've done this on calls too, where I just ask people right now, currently in this moment in life, what's most important to you? Lots of answers get written down, but the one that never gets written down, that's the most true in a way. And the professor, people sit there saying, well, getting laid, partying, getting good grades, my health, there's all sorts of answers. And he said to the students, he said, it's good answers, but none of them are the real answer. The real answer is what's most important to you right now is being in this class because you're here. That what they were doing is a lot more important than what they're saying. And so, we can tell a lot about, well, everything about what our priorities are. People will say, I'm no, I really love you. I'm romantically interested, but their behaviors, not squaring up with that. They don't prioritize the relationship. And so to me, if you're stepping into this function or you've got some aspir, which by the way, it's worth also just wondering, do I really want to do this? Because it's mostly responsibility. I think it gets looked at as, oh, it's all upside, and now I'm an elder, and I get seen as an elder, and people will respect me, and I'm finally going to get that, admiration that I've deserved for so long, and now I get to be listened to, and people are going to take me seriously. It's mostly burden. It's mostly taking on responsibility for the wider world, and a lot of it's unpaid. I mean, so it's worth just pumping the brakes on is, do I want this? And I know Sabone Fusome, she talks about in her village, the Dagara people in West Africa, the elders had to be pleaded with to join the elders council. And they would often say, no, no, go to this other. They know so many more songs and stories and they're wiser. And because they just want to be with their grandkids. They want an easy life, but the gifts are given and they're really pled with. And a lot of them genuinely are not hankering after this. So it's just worth pausing and looking at what is the hankering after? Is there any part of this that it's an identity that I want to have uh, rather than a relationship with people in the world I want to establish? Because when there's no kinship, we get identity. That's the booby prize. It all
Mm.
collapses to that. So it's understandable that we want it, but that's worth wondering about. And it just takes room, it takes space. And so it's worth looking at our lives of, am I giving this the room it deserves? Am I giving this the space it deserves? Or is it just a badge that I want? It's like in all these online communities, it's fine, it's fun. You can get badges because you completed a program. But if that's what we want, it's just, I don't think that's particularly noble. I think that instinct undermines the thing.
Mm.
If anything, one should be reticent to be given that badge. Some young person's coming at you, it's like, may I attach this to your clothes? And it's like, oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I don't know if I want that. Let's talk about that. Let me go and think about that for a long time. The I mean, I think this was the Dagara people too. And this is just as I remember it, so don't hold me to it. But as I recall it, if you were going to be on this elders council or play this function more formally, there was an initiation into it. And the initiation probably had a lot more than this, but one of the things it had in it is you would be coated in a sacred ash, and they would take you and put you in the town square. And for the coming days, 3 days, I think it was, people would come and tell you every single blind spot you had. They would tell you every time you'd hurt them. Uh, all your faults and failings would be. And why? Well, because we can't afford to have you in that kind of seat of power uninitiated with those blind spots. The consequences will be too great, as we can see with so many of the gurus out there who, end up sleeping with all their students or being profoundly abusive.
Mm.
They weren't ready for it and they hadn't been put through the paces. And we turn them into this. Like you're saying, there's a complicity in this. We're so hungry for wisdom, and then we sort of deify these people. Some 18-year-old, monk or 21-year-old monk comes from the East, and then we do this to them, and we expect them to survive our adulation and our hunger, and it usually, undermines them too.
Mm.
So it's, do you really want it? One, are you willing to give it the space? Two, are you willing to receive the kind of feedback that it might entail? Because I found a lot of people say they are, but then when it comes, the kitchen's too hot for them, and they have to get out.
Mm. Wow, that's a great note to end on then, Tad. Do you really want it? Do you really want it? Yeah, is this for you? I think that's a really good question. Thank you so much, Tad, for being with us today. And I really have enjoyed this conversation, and what a blessing to have you and to listen to your wisdom too. Thanks, Tad.
Thanks for having me.